Hey guys, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can make a more photorealistic render. To do that, we're going to be using, instead of the standard render, we're going to now go to the physical render. It's going to just use different calculations to, more realistic calculations to render our scene. And with that physical render, we're also going to be using a PBR material instead of a standard material. So if you just hold left click on this, you can see a list of different kinds of materials. So now we'll be using PBR hand in hand with the physical render. What I'm gonna also be doing is we're gonna go over what a UV map is. We're gonna show you how you can light with an HDRI image, and what I'm going to do is show you how we can take a material from another website maybe and apply that turn that into a material in Cinema4D. So in previous tutorials, I showed you that there's Cinema4D Center, where you can find a lot of different cool materials. There's also ambientcg.com, which has a great selection, and then there's Polyhaven, which has also a great selection of materials, and there's also HDRI images, which are just really high definition 360-degree images of different environments that can be used to more realistically light your scene. But what we're just going to be grabbing is a texture from Polyhaven, and I'm going to go at this river small rocks texture. I thought that one looks cool. It has a lot of interesting things going on. You can feel free to select whatever you like. If you click this thing over here to expand all the maps, you'll see we have all these different maps that we'll be getting. So you can go ahead and click download. I've already downloaded mine. And if you go back to Cinema4D, we're going to apply those textures to our material here. In Cinema4D Center, there's a great page that explains how you can apply your texture maps. So you can see that it explains what the different channels mean, and it can show you where you can apply your ambient occlusion map, normal map, height map, and what is going on with all of these. So I'll include this as a link in the description. So if we double click that, I'm going to show you what the materials will look like, or the textures rather. So here's the textures that I've downloaded from the scene. The file will come with some other, the folder will come with some other files, but we don't need to look at those. It's a Blender file and an object that we don't need. So in the textures folder, we have an ambient occlusion map. We have this arm map. I'm not exactly sure what that's used for, but then we also have a diffusion map for color, a displacement map, and normal map and roughness map. So let's go ahead and apply those to a PBR material. So first, so you can see when you create a PBR material, by default the reflectance is ticked on. So let's go ahead and populate this reflectance layer. So there's a couple layers within reflectance by default, reflection and diffuse. Rather than color, you can apply the diffuse map within the reflectance, and it can give a more realistic look and can help speed up your render time. So if you click on that diffuse button and you go down here to texture, we can apply our diffuse texture, and now we have color. There's different things you can do with the roughness map, but I'm going to apply that to the reflection layer here. All right, so now we have a couple other maps. One of them is ambient occlusion, which we can apply to this diffusion layer here. And that's going to kind of change the way that the material is shaded. There's also displacement that we want to add to make those rocks kind of jut out. So we can load in that displacement map. And I'm going to also click this subpolygon displacement to basically add more subdivisions to get a smoother look. And then there's one more map, normal map. There's a few different normal maps here. Let's just try GL and see how that looks. All right, you can see that normal map added in a lot of great detail. So we've just loaded those textures into a PBR material here. And now we need to apply that to an object. So let's just do a plane. So we'll create a plane, and we're going to want to up the width segments to maybe say 600. We want to give this plane a lot of vertices, a lot of polygons, so that it can so that those rocks are able to kind of jut out and stick up when they're displaced. So let's go back to Gouraud shading, and I'm going to just drag and drop this PBR material, and now it's applied. So if we go to our render settings, let's just see what we got here. So I'm going to leave the width and height as this default. You can up the resolution to maybe 1920 by 1080 if you want to get a higher resolution image, but for now I'm going to leave that. And here's the physical settings. With the physical settings, this right here is going to determine the samples. So it's gonna determine how high quality your image is. But if you put it to high all the time, high takes a really long time to render. You probably want to only select that when you have a finalized render. So we'll leave it at low or even preview for now, and we'll see how this looks. There we go. So we can see that our image looks like it has a little bit of displacement going on. You can see around the edges there's a little bit going on. But our plane, our materials, it still looks kind of flat and not so great. So what we're going to do to change that is apply some different render settings, some different lighting. All right, so let's light this up and make it look a little better. What I'm going to do is first show you the different skies we have here. So what we can do is actually grab a physical sky in this menu here. And this is going to kind of just be a color that you can, the skies, there's a few different settings where you can change the color of the sky and where it is in the sky and the time of day it is. And there's some pretty cool settings you can do there. And we can just take a look and see what that looks like. And by the way, so instead of clicking just render every time, I'm going to show you that we can actually render just a region of our image to kind of speed it up so we don't have to wait for the entire thing to render every time. But already you can see that, okay, we're already getting a lot of really nice lighting, and you can see a little bit more of the rocks and the reflections. So that already made a huge difference. What if you don't want to use physical sky? What if you want to use an image rather? So what we can do for that is to create a sky. I'm going to hide our physical sky. And in our asset browser, we can search for, maybe there's some HDRIs that exist here, and that Cinema4D will provide that we can use. My render is slowing everything down. Here we go. So, all right, here's a bunch of different materials, and let's go ahead and just take this one maybe. So what that is just it's a material that just has luminance and reflectance. And it's just a high resolution image. And if we drag that onto our sky, we'll now have this sunset scene. And I want the sun to be coming from the front here, so we'll get a cool reflection. And if we want to change that, we can click on our material tag here, and we can offset the UV map, which is how the image is placed on our object, in this case the sky. So if we adjust this along the U, it's going to rotate that way, and if we move it down the V, we can change how high or low it is. And now if we render this, let's see what it looks like. And I'm going to instead I'll show you, if we hover over this one and we do render region, we can actually just click and drag and just render a part of our scene. Render region. Oh, there it goes. I went a little too soon. And you can see that the rocks are actually kind of shiny and reflectant, kind of like they're wet. The reason for that is that in the reflectance channel, I applied the roughness map to our reflection here, but what I can do is turn that down a bit to kind of lower that wetness. But I actually like that, so I'm just going to leave it up. I think it looks kind of cool. So I'm going to render it here just so that we can compare the two, and you can see the difference in the render times using different, not using a physical sky, using a physical sky, and then using an HDRI sky. All these different kind of lightings are going to make different calculations, and it can slow down your render time. So it's something to think about when you're working on your scene. And here's what that looks like rendered from the side with the HDRI view. So you can see that the HDRI is a really awesome and realistic looking sky. So that can be used as a cool background. And you can see some of that displacement coming in on our material here. You can up that or lower that if you want over here with the height. But I'm just going to leave that for now. Something to think about as well is how the material is appearing on our plane here. As we saw before, you can change, if you click on this material tag, you can change the offset of the material on the X and Y. And you can also change the length of it. So you can change kind of how often it duplicates itself on the X and Y. So you can make the rock smaller or bigger by expanding these values or lowering them. Let's try 50 and see how that looks. Maybe we'll get more detail if we have some smaller rocks. To get into UV maps a little bit more, let's see exactly what they are and what it means when we're changing these U and V values. If we click our plane and we go to this UV edit button up here for a different layout, we can see that when we select our plane, it populates over here. And you can see that this is our plane, obviously in a two-dimensional view. If we create another object, let's try this platonic one, and we select that. You can see the UV map is essentially this object basically cut and laid out flat on a 2D plane. So these dark lines represent where the object is cut, and it's basically just laid out flat. So when we apply a material to this, it's essentially a flat material, like a square image, is placed over this laid out UV map, and that's how the image is going to be applied to it. So when you're changing these U and V values over here, it's basically sliding an image on the X or Y axis in this 2D view. And I might raise this back up a little bit. So let's see how this looks now. All right, so that took 1:17 to render, and you can see as you get more of this material in the scene, it's more to calculate, so it takes a little bit longer. We're making some progress in our texture, so you can see how we've kind of advanced it over time. And now what we're going to do is apply some render settings to improve the quality of the render drastically. Those effects that we're going to add are ambient occlusion, which is going to change the way that the objects are have shadow. And then we are going to add this global illumination. And this one's the big one that's going to really make our scene more realistic. It essentially models how light is bounced off of surfaces onto other surfaces, so how the objects can light each other. And this is going to make it a lot more realistic, but it's also going to really dramatically slow down increase our render time. So let's give this a shot and see what this does and how long this takes when we apply it just like that. You can see that with global illumination, it first does an irradiance cache pass, which takes a little bit of time, and then it will get to the actual physical render process. That finished up, and you can see it's totally different from the other stuff we had before. So if we go back, we can see our first without lighting, with just physical sky, with our HDRI sky, and now with global illumination and ambient occlusion, we've got a lot more shadows going on. It looks like, you can see this nice reflectance off the rocks. It looks really good. And we're going to render this up closer so that we can see, but take note, look how much longer that took. It took about 3 minutes longer. So that's why when you're just testing, it can be good to do just a region, rendering just a region of your scene, or even turning off global illumination while you're just testing out certain things, or turning your samples down to low so that the calculations might not be as accurate, but it'll be faster. Whatever works for your workflow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get in closer on these rocks so we can get a little more detail, and I'm going to add some objects into our scene so that we can see exactly how these rocks are jutting out of the floor. We want to see that displacement a little better, and putting in some objects might help bring that out a bit. So I'm going to just put a couple of spheres in here, and I'll up the segments maybe to 60 to get it more round. And let's just duplicate that, make another one. Cool. So we've got a couple of spheres here. Let's zoom in on them. Maybe something like this. And what I'm also going to do is just add some glow to these, some luminance and glow, to see how that lighting affects the rest of the scene. It might be kind of a cool look. So we'll do a PBR material. I'll do reflectance, luminance, and glow. For glow, I will maybe do the radius to 15, and I'll turn these down maybe to 50, 100, something like that. And I want this one, I want these each to be a different color. Maybe one of them will be blue, some kind of blue color, a little bit darker blue, and all right. And if we duplicate that, let's make this one now maybe a yellow color. And this is also yellow. All right. And I'll apply one of each. And let's see what this looks like. Oh, and before we render that, we also need to add a glow effect. So let's give that a spin. All right, that took a little bit longer, but it's looking pretty cool. The light is, hitting those rocks a bit. You can see with these spheres, you're getting some of that displacement that's showing. It's getting a little bit more detail, which looks cool. I'm gonna move these spheres around a little bit, and I'm gonna try and move the lighting so it's coming from the front here, and I'm gonna change the luminance a little bit to make them appear brighter. So I'm actually gonna get closer too. Maybe I'll move these into the floor a little bit. And I'm gonna change the luminance to 200 from 100. Maybe I'll make them a little whiter. So they look like they're glowing more. And I'll change this to 200. A little bit whiter. All right. And what I'm going to also do is create a camera so that we can go out of this view, but then snap back into that camera. And yeah, I want the sun to maybe be more over here. I think that'll be good. All right, so we got a little closer. I'm also, so we saw in our render view here, let me cancel this, that we're getting some detail here, but I want one of these bigger rocks to kind of go in the way of these spheres so we can see that displacement a little more. Maybe if I move these guys up towards that blue, so it looks like these two, if I move that in front, maybe that will give me some more detail there. So if I move the offset a tiny bit, maybe something like this. So now those rocks are in front. Maybe that'll give a little bit more detail. I'm going to give this another render and see how it looks. All right, so that took a little bit longer now, but you can see, I think that looks a lot cooler. You can see this reflection more. It looks like the floor looks a little bit more rocky. What I'm gonna do now is a couple more tweaks. I'm gonna make that a little less bright. I'm gonna angle the camera probably a little more downwards like that so we can see some more of the rocks from this angle. Will give them a popping appearance more. And we'll see how that looks. All right, guys, I made one more adjustment and I ended up with this image. What I did was I moved the plane down a little bit. I thought it might help with the lighting, and here's where my sky is at. It's at 87. I moved the spheres down a bit as well, and then I changed the luminance on the yellow a little bit. I think I moved the color a little less white to give it a little bit more color. And I angled my camera closer and lower to the ground. And now we can see some pretty good rocks here. It's looking pretty nice. And I'm going to do two more things now. One is I'm going to up the sample count to make it less grainy, make it look a lot nicer. And I'm going to also add depth of field. And that can really help create some more realism. And it's going to focus kind of on the center or wherever I want it to, and then it'll make the other parts blurry. So what we're going to do is that first, and I'm going to actually disable global illumination ambient occlusion so that we can mess with that quicker. To add in depth of field, we're going to first go to our settings and make sure that depth of field is checked right here in our physical setting. Then what we're going to do is we want to decide where the depth of field is going to focus on, and I think probably the middle of our image would be the best. And that setting is, if you can find that if you click camera and you go to focus object here, that's going to determine what we're going to be looking at, what object, or you can change this distance here. But I find it to be useful to just select an object. So we could pick one of our spheres and just drag and drop that in focus object, but I'm actually going to create a null object, just a blank object to put in between them, so our focus is in the middle. So here, if I just click plane, and I zoom out, and we have a plane, and I can just move that over in between our objects here. That looks about in the middle. All right, that looks pretty good. So I will now drag that plane object into our view here. And this f-stop value will determine how much of the scene is blurry versus not blurry. So let's first go ahead and see what this looks like. And it's going to look different now that I've disabled ambient occlusion and global illumination, but it'll allow us to see what the depth of field looks like, and we can tinker with the settings and change it how we want. So you can already kind of see that there's a focus here in the middle, and it's getting blurrier on the outside. And I think we're going to need to expand this a bit to, we only want the edges to be blurry. It would be good to get more detail from the stuff in the front closer to us. So I'm going to play with the settings now and try to adjust that. That finished up, and we can see compared to what I had before, the blurriness went more towards the edge when I changed it to 2.5, and with the glow it's kind of harder to see, but you can see that there's some focus going on in here. So I think that the scene's ready to go, and I'm going to now up all my physical render settings. So instead of low quality, we're going to do high quality and see how that looks. We'll turn back these. I think these settings are fine. Maybe you could do high samples, but that's going to take a really long time. I think medium will be fine. And with high quality, these look good, and I'm going to now you could up the width and height. I'm just going to leave it and make sure I'm saving this out as a PNG. And I think we are now good to go. So we'll hit render and wait a long time, make sure we save our project, and we will see how this looks. All right, so that finished up, and we can see it took a really long time this time, almost 42 minutes, because of those high quality settings that we applied, but the quality, the noise, the grain that we were seeing looks really nice and clear here. The image quality is a lot better. And I actually went ahead and made some other changes and was able to get an image to look like this just by tinkering around with the position of the lightings and the brightness of these spheres and some positioning. So we can get some really awesome results using this method, and you can see how simple our scene is. It's really not too much going on. Just tweaking some lighting, the materials, the camera position, the depth of field, we can do a lot of stuff. And you can apply this technique, different lighting and stuff to different materials, as long as you're putting your materials together properly, putting the right textures in the right layer, you can get a really good looking material. So I hope this helped you guys. Leave some comments if you have any questions, and stay tuned for more videos.